Bandits are often cartoonishly villainous thieves that attack once, maybe twice, and then they flee into the woods to sit in their hideout and wait for the party to come and slaughter them. They may act as your party's first ongoing antagonist when reaching those early 3rd and 4th levels, but they're ultimately little more than a speed bump before the real plot kicks in and the pesky bandits become all but forgotten about. What if you could make your early level bandit raids memorable and terrifying in your dark fantasy campaign? My name is Byrne, and this is how to make bandits and raiders formidable in your tabletop RPG campaign. I think the common image of a bandit is a sort of angry Robin Hood with his not so merry men. Bandits wear leathers and cloaks and maybe furs and very often hoods. They wield short swords and bows, and if the GM is feeling particularly creative, maybe one of them even has 2 hand axes instead. They most often live in the woods, probably in an abandoned village or a crumbling castle or an old cave, and their tactics are to ambush from the trees to get the player character's attention before retreating back to their lair to provide a bit of a dungeon crawl at the end. What if the bandits in your campaign are Valican raiders who attack and raid villages on the coast and inside tributaries? These raids from longships would be terrifying and lightning fast and present a unique challenge to your player characters in finding and confronting the Valicans once they have fled. There's no tracks to follow on the water. There's only a random pattern of attacks on different settlements that can hardly be anticipated. And if your players do manage to secure a boat and they sail out on the water after the raiders, would they be able to fight against even just 3 longships filled with raiders all at the same time? You could run a campaign where the bandits are instead wood elves living deep in the forest, watching the ancient roads and forbidding passage to travelers. But they engage in more than mere ambushes, employing the forest itself as a terrifying weapon. The wood elves' victims are lashed to trees and smothered with honey, slowly being picked at and eaten alive by insects and rats. This is a grave warning, but it is also a horrid trap because anyone who tries to help the victim is then attacked by the aggressive swarm of insects themselves. Your party may successfully find tracks to follow the wood elves, but they don't realize that this is a purposely laid path that leads directly into a swamp of carnivorous plants or a cave that's filled with gricks. Perhaps your bandits needn't hide at all and are in fact an organized crime syndicate operating in almost plain sight of the city guards, but their brutal mobster-style tactics have the city gripped in fear, including disappearances, murders, and public displays of mutilation. Do your Valican raiders wear iron helms and chainmail beneath their direwolf pelts and drake scales? Do they bang on their wooden shields and charge into battle fearlessly rather than hiding among the trees or fighting from a distance like cowards would? Are your wood elves even discernible from the trees until they attack? Do they paint their hands and faces to conceal themselves even better, so that ideally their foes are dead without ever having seen them at all? Do your dark devotees wear the bones of humanoids over their armor, or disguise themselves as monsters using bear pelts? Surely the wealthiest among your city syndicate dress as nobles would and wipe the blood from their hands with silk handkerchiefs. These are only a handful of ideas that you can use, or create your own bandits entirely. The point is to avoid falling into the commonly held imagery and tactics of the forest-dwelling fantasy bandits. Discover a different concept that you love, and then go hard with those ideas and imagery to create something unique to your campaign. Your wood elves may indeed have a lair deep inside the forest, but instead of having them squat in that lair waiting for the party to find them, make them active defenders of the woods. Make the entire forest the elves' lair, so that the moment the party step beyond the tree line, they are in danger of being ambushed. Think of the forest as one big dungeon, but instead of a map of rooms, you might simply create a flowchart of different forest encounters. Just like a dungeon, some of these encounters might be combat with the elves directly, but they might be social encounters with friendly monsters or non-combatant elves. They might be some kind of puzzle or a physical obstacle like a fey gate or a rocky cliff. Or they might be a devastating trap, like a spike pit made from the bones of those that dared trespass in the woods before. This makes your bandits feel like they are a more active and dangerous threat than if they were all huddled in a cave waiting for the party to discover them through a single survival check to find their footprints. Alternatively, have the bandits attack a settlement without warning, perhaps on longship from the nearby river. The Valican raiders rush into the village, which you might think of once again as a dungeon. Think of how terrifying an actual raid would be. The hot embers of burning houses are scorching your hands, and the black smoke burns your eyes and lungs. You hear screams off in the dark, but in that moment you are powerless to help them. You also hear the chilling cries of berserkers and strange war songs that are sung by the Valicans during the killing. You find the village priest disemboweled and strung up as a sacrifice to the Valican primordials, and these monstrous human beings are now the foe that you are tasked in fighting. Simply elevating the description of your bandit attack can make them seem so much more formidable. Remember the terrifying thought that one doesn't need to be a literal monster to do the most dreadful things to their fellow human. When constructing your warband of cutthroats and thieves, consider what it is they actually want, or how it is that they ended up leading a life of violence and criminality. Do they even consider themselves to be criminals? Or are they fighting for their own justified cause? Or are they fighting for survival? The Squire from The Witcher are elven and dwarven freedom fighters who wage guerrilla warfare against the human kingdoms who have all but driven them out of their homes. Yet, the Squire are being funded and fed information from the Nilfgaardian Empire. They are being used as a weapon to destabilize the Northern Kingdoms to prepare for a Nilfgaard invasion. Does this make the Squire's cause less just? Morally complicate your bandit situation and motivation, and your players are far more likely to be engaged with the story of your campaign. In an adventure that I wrote, bandits had attacked a caravan on the road and murdered most of its guard. They stole everything from the wagons, supplies that were vital to a remote village that was suffering from a plague. When the bandits are confronted, the party may discover that their folk are suffering from the same disease. The bandits stole the supplies in necessity to help their own kin, but they still murdered the caravan guard in cold blood. How will your party find true justice in this situation? Adding moral complexity also affords you the opportunity to flesh out the leaders and the important NPCs of your raiding warband. What's their motivation? What's their history? Has a life of intolerance and abuse caused them to choose violence? Are they simply motivated by greed? But the agents that they employ are poor desperates who dream of a better life using stolen gold. Do your elves protect a sacred grove in a land where magic is fading? Is it the last forest untouched by civilization? And if despoiled or logged, its fey denizens may disappear or die off permanently. Moral complexity will make your bandits far more engaging and an important threat that your party need to deal with. If you're playing 5e or a compatible tabletop RPG, there's actually a lot more options for stat blocks to make up your bandit warband than one may initially realize. There is, of course, the bandit and the bandit captain, but I almost never use these stat blocks beyond early levels, and that's really for when they're intended. They're early level softball encounters that don't really provide much challenge or flavor in the stat block itself. I much prefer using scouts, spies, berserkers, and thugs, even at the early levels, because their stat blocks provide a better range of effective tanking, damage, and stealthing to really challenge your party with a variety of tactics. You can and should could even mix your bandit stat blocks in different encounters to have 1 berserker, 1 spy, and 2 thugs, or any combination of such. This makes the combat feel more dynamic, and it makes your bandits feel like individuals working together rather than a mob of faceless baddies. As your players level up, you can add more thugs and introduce even more powerful NPC stat blocks to be foes. Swashbucklers, knights, gladiators, personal favorite, and even assassins make for great bandit leaders, depending on what suits the theme or aesthetic that you've created. They can also make great minions for even higher level bandit threats. Using mages as leaders or lieutenants of your bandit warband can also create more dynamic encounters. Are your Valican raiders led by druids from the prismatic circle? Does an elven mage lead your wood elves? Are your flesh-eating folk led by a cult fanatic or even a priest? And of course, third-party 5e books will provide you an entirely new army of humanoid stat blocks that you can make up a unique bandit warband with. Grim Hollow, the Monster Grimoire, is actually pretty stacked with unique NPC stat blocks that can be used to make really uniquely themed bandit adversaries, whether the stat block is used for the bandit leaders, lieutenants, or the minions. Let me start with the Knife Tooth Horde, which have a whole array of stat blocks to build an entire warband from. These aggressive folk have been enveloped by the darkness of Etheris and need to resort to savagery to survive. While the Knife Tooth Hunter does have stealth proficiencies, the warband as a whole doesn't seem to lend itself to hit and run tactics. The Slayer and the Warlord stat blocks are too brutal and too reckless. I would instead mix these stat blocks during encounters and have a large roaming warband emerge from the wilderness and fall upon the party's location suddenly. Have a village wiped out like I described earlier, and the stories that remain leave the party wondering whether their quarry are humanoids or monsters. The black powder pistol wielding outlaw could also make for a challenging adversary not often seen in fantasy themed role-playing, at least not as an antagonist. Their bandit gang might all be mounted on horseback for devastating hit and run attacks on innocent NPCs and possibly even the party. The leader of your outlaw gang may be the only one wielding a black powder pistol, making them a unique villain with a high bounty on their head, or you might use both the outlaw stat blocks that are provided in the Monster Grimoire to create an entire gang of gun-wielding highway thieves. A fractured is a person who masquerades as a noble, but when they become enraged, they monstrously swell in size and strength. They're a sort of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or a Bruce Banner and the Hulk. They could be the perfect surprise leader for your urban bandit syndicate, the party assuming they're just a noble that will be easily overcome in combat. Instead, the fractured rage will catch your players entirely by surprise as the noble dishes out brutal and reckless attacks. That is literally just scratching the very surface of the number of NPC stat blocks in the Monster Grimoire that could be used to create engaging and high-level bandit warbands. You could create a cabal of plague doctors who run a syndicate selling body parts taken from raids on smaller settlements. Living crucibles could make up an entire warband of alchemically enhanced marauders. You can mix monster stat blocks into your bandit warbands to make the encounter even more dynamic. A pack of trained wolves fights alongside your Valican raiders. Your wood elves might be assisted by dryads or woodwoads. A surprise monster might even be the head of your criminal organization. If this sounded good to you, if you're like, yes, I want to run a Valican raid now, you might be interested in Ghostfire Gaming's current Kickstarter, Grim Hollow Valican Clans, which features unique stat blocks for the Valican raiders and for the druids of the Prismatic Circle so that you can create Valican raiding encounters that your party need to go up against. Using rules from this Kickstarter, you could also make your party the raiders and they can lead their own Valican raid against a settlement for loot and glory. You can check out the Kickstarter through the link that's going to be right up here, or you can check the one down in the description. You can see those raiding mechanics in practice by watching this video here, where we do a gameplay trailer to show exactly how they work, not something typically done in tabletop RPGs. Or you could check out this trailer to see how to make elementals a formidable threat in your campaign.